In an upscale restaurant where polished silverware and whispered conversations filled the air, Colonel Erica Johnson was used to being the object of admiration. Her achievements, sacrifices, and unwavering commitment to her country had earned her respect in many circles. Yet, this time, it was different. As she walked in, a wave of silence seemed to ripple through the room, and not the kind she was accustomed to. Erica, at 55, was a striking woman with tan skin, short-cropped hair, and a well-maintained figure. Despite her years of service, she remained youthful in spirit, choosing comfort over extravagance. Dressed simply in a white blouse and well-worn jeans, she didn't appear to be the powerful army colonel that she was. For tonight, she wanted nothing more than a quiet dinner and a moment of peace, a reward for the long months of overseas duty. The restaurant gleamed with opulence. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and soft classical melodies filled the air. Erica chose a window seat where she could gaze out at the city as the evening sun bathed the streets in a golden hue. With a gentle smile, she picked up the menu and perused the options with a steady hand, already knowing exactly what she wanted: a medium-rare steak and a glass of rich red wine. As she placed the menu back on the table, a subtle unease settled in. Across the room, a group of 4 white diners sat at a lavish table, their attire expensive but their demeanor far from elegant. Their eyes were fixed on Erica, whispering among themselves, exchanging looks that spoke louder than any words could. Erica felt the sting of their gaze, but she had long learned how to navigate the harshest of criticisms. As a woman of color who had risen to the ranks of colonel in a military culture often steeped in prejudice, she had endured far worse. Their judgment, however loud it seemed, was nothing compared to the battles she had fought, both in her career and in her personal life. A young waiter approached her, his eyes avoiding hers, a neutral expression masking his true feelings. "What would you like to order?" he asked with a lack of warmth. "Steak. Medium rare," Erica replied, her voice calm yet firm. She didn't let his indifferent attitude faze her. She had dealt with far greater challenges. Just as she was about to settle back into the moment, the group of diners rose and walked toward her table. Their leader, a man in his 40s with an air of superiority, addressed Erica, his tone dripping with condescension. "You must be lost," he sneered, looking her up and down. "This place is for people like us, not someone like you." Erica's gaze remained steady. She didn't flinch. In fact, her response was soft, but filled with authority. "I am exactly where I need to be." The man scoffed but said nothing more, and as quickly as they had appeared, they returned to their table. It was a small moment, yet it carried weight. Erica could feel the undercurrent of tension shift in the room. The group had made their point, but Erica had made hers as well. But the night was far from over. As she sat back, waiting for her meal, a police officer entered the restaurant, his eyes scanning the room. It wasn't long before he made his way over to Erica's table. He didn't ask to take a seat, nor did he engage in any pleasantries. Instead, he stood, arms crossed. "I've received a complaint," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. "The staff says you've been causing a disturbance." Erica's eyes narrowed. "I've been here for less than 30 minutes. I've caused no disturbance." The officer hesitated, looking between Erica and the staff. The murmurs from the group of diners grew louder. The situation was quickly escalating, and Erica could feel the weight of the room's scrutiny. In that moment, she stood up, her tall, strong frame casting a commanding presence. She wasn't about to let this unjust moment define her evening. "I served this country, faced bullets, and stared prejudice in the face every day. I don't need to prove anything to anyone here," Erica declared, her voice firm yet calm. The officer, unsure of how to respond, looked back at the staff and then at the diners. It wasn't until the restaurant manager, a woman who had been quietly observing, intervened that the tension began to dissipate. She stepped forward, her eyes locking with the officer's. "There is no disturbance here. You're mistaken." The officer's posture stiffened, realizing that the situation was slipping out of his control. After a brief pause, he nodded curtly and walked away, his footsteps echoing as he retreated. The room was silent for a moment. Then slowly, the whispers began to die down. The group of diners exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly realizing that they had underestimated Erica's resolve. And just as swiftly as they had criticized, they returned to their conversation, now subdued. As Erica sat back down, she allowed herself a small, victorious smile. Her steak arrived moments later, cooked perfectly. She lifted her glass of red wine, the deep ruby liquid glistening in the light. Tonight, she had fought not with words or fists, but with dignity and quiet strength. In a world where prejudice often tries to dictate who belongs and who does not, Colonel Erica Johnson had shown once again that true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. Colonel Erica Johnson sat at the table, the glass of red wine before her, now untouched. The waiter had taken her order without a word, but as the minutes stretched into what seemed like an eternity, Erica couldn't help but notice that the food she had been eagerly awaiting had not yet arrived. The other tables, many of them seated after her, had already been served. The restaurant, which had once felt like a peaceful oasis, now seemed like a battleground. With every tick of the clock, the discomfort in her chest grew. Erica had always prided herself on patience, but this time she couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling creeping into her mind. When the waiter finally passed by once again, Erica raised her hand, her voice calm yet assertive as she called out to him. "Excuse me, my food hasn't arrived yet. Is there a problem?" He stopped, his expression cold. With a sigh, he glanced at her, clearly inconvenienced. "The kitchen's busy. Please wait a little longer," he muttered, dismissing her request with a curt tone. Erica nodded, holding back the frustration that was beginning to bubble up inside her. She reminded herself that this night was for relaxation, not confrontation. But the longer she waited, the more the weight of the moment settled in her mind. The murmurs from the group of white diners near her table only made things worse. Their laughter, laced with sarcasm, mixed with words that were far from subtle. "Must be in the wrong place," one of them whispered loudly. "Look who walks in here dressed like that." Erica didn't flinch. Her gaze met theirs, unwavering and calm. For a moment, one of the diners faltered under the intensity of her eyes, before turning away in discomfort. But the damage had already been done. She could feel the sting of their prejudice, and the quiet tension that had settled in her chest made it hard to breathe. Finally, after nearly 40 minutes, the steak arrived, cold and unappetizing. It wasn't the medium-rare perfection she had imagined. The wine was wrong too, a cheap red that didn't even come close to what she had ordered. Erica's disappointment was palpable as she picked up her knife. She tried to cut the steak, but it was rubbery and overcooked. The small flicker of anger in her heart flared for a brief moment, but she fought to keep it contained. This was not the evening she had envisioned. With a deep breath, she put the knife down and called the waiter back, his face twisted with impatience, clearly irritated by her insistence. "What's the problem now?" he asked. Erica took another steadying breath, her voice controlled but firm. "This dish is not up to standard. I would like to speak to the manager." The waiter's lips curled into a smirk. His words were dripping with disdain. "Actually, I think the problem is you. If you're not satisfied, you can leave." For a moment, Erica felt her body tense, the sting of his words like a slap to the face. Her military training kicked in, and she took another deep breath, refusing to let her emotions take control. She held his gaze with unflinching eyes and said, "I demand to see the manager, now!" But before the waiter could respond, another figure appeared. From a nearby table, a man in a police uniform stood up and walked over to Erica's table. His expression was hard, and there was no kindness in his eyes. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice stern and accusatory. "Are you causing trouble?" Erica's eyes met his without fear. She kept her voice calm and controlled, unwavering. "I simply asked to see the manager. The service here has not been satisfactory. This is my right as a customer." But the officer was not interested in hearing her side. He crossed his arms and stared down at her, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "It seems like you're more interested in picking a fight than having a pleasant dinner," he said, his words harsh. "I need to see your identification. Now." Erica's heart raced. The officer's words were like a punch to the gut. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being treated like a criminal. She didn't respond with anger, but instead, her mind worked quickly to calculate her next move. She had faced far worse challenges in her career, but never had it felt so personal. The weight of the injustice pressing down on her made it harder to breathe, but she didn't let it show. She remained calm, knowing that her response would define not only this moment, but the larger battle against prejudice she had been fighting for years. Erica's frown deepened as a surge of indignation rushed through her. It wasn't just the injustice of the treatment, it was the blatant abuse of power. She knew the law, and she had done nothing wrong to warrant being asked for her identification. Her voice remained calm, though the firmness in her tone grew stronger. "I don't think I need to do that," Erica replied, her words controlled but firm. "I'm a customer. I have the right to demand better service. I'm not obligated to show my ID just because I'm unhappy." The policeman raised an eyebrow, clearly dissatisfied with her defiance. He leaned closer to the table, his voice now threatening, his words sharp like a blade. "Who do you think you are to disobey police orders? I told you to show me your papers. You have to do it." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. The once quiet elegance of the place now felt suffocating. Other diners began to turn their heads, some whispering, others just staring with eyes full of curiosity and discomfort. The group of white guests at the nearby table chuckled, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Erica, however, felt the weight of their judgment, and yet she kept her composure. Taking a deep breath, she focused on staying calm, knowing that any escalation would only make matters worse. But this blatant injustice was something she could not let pass without challenge. "I did nothing wrong," Erica insisted, her gaze unwavering as it met the officer's. "If you feel like I'm causing trouble, you can call the restaurant manager to handle it." The policeman's smirk grew wider, his ego swelling, as if she had just dared to challenge his authority. Without hesitation, he pulled out his walkie-talkie and called for backup. But he didn't stop there. In a move that sent a wave of panic through the room, he suddenly pulled out his gun and placed it on his hip, his voice becoming louder and more threatening. "I demand that you stand up and leave this restaurant immediately. This is my last warning." A sharp gasp rippled through the room. Several diners ducked under the table or quickly averted their eyes, their faces filled with fear. The waiter, holding a tray of food, froze in place, his hands shaking as he gripped it. But Erica remained seated, her posture still and unwavering. She refused to be intimidated. Her eyes locked with the officer's, steady and piercing. In that moment, every ounce of discipline and bravery she had honed throughout her military career surged to the forefront. "Do you really want to threaten a woman just for asking for food?" Erica asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the tension in the air. The policeman didn't respond, but his face turned a deep shade of red, his anger simmering. He took a step forward, his grip on the gun tightening. Erica knew this was the breaking point. She could not let this escalate any further, especially not in a place where she was simply trying to enjoy a meal in peace. With a quiet determination, she reached for her bag beside her, her fingers brushing over its contents. She pulled out a small wallet, opened it slowly, and revealed her military ID. The name and rank were clear: Colonel Erica Johnson, United States Army. Holding the card, In front of her, she raised it with calm authority, her voice steady and firm. "I don't need to prove anything to you," she said, "but if you really want to know who I am, here it is." The officer's demeanor shifted slightly. His eyes scanned the ID card, his fingers pausing as they traced the information. For the first time, he seemed to hesitate, uncertainty flickering. Behind his eyes, Erica held her ground, watching him closely. This was a turning point, a moment where her identity and years of service could speak louder than any threats or intimidation. The tension in the air was palpable. Would the officer back down? Or would he continue to let his authority be the weapon to silence her? The color drained from the officer's face as he stared at the military ID in Erica's hand. The confidence and arrogance he had displayed earlier vanished, replaced by confusion and an obvious sense of regret. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted, the weight of Erica's words sinking in. Whispers began to ripple through the room, louder now. Several diners stood up, straining to get a better look. The group of white customers who had initially mocked Erica fell silent, their faces betraying the embarrassment they were now feeling. "I have served this country for nearly 30 years, Erica continued, her voice growing stronger, each word resonating with power. "And today, all I wanted was a quiet dinner. Instead, I was treated like a criminal. Is this how you use your power to protect citizens?" The young policeman stammered, clearly struggling to find words to justify himself. I don't know." Erica's gaze swept across the entire room, her eyes locking onto the faces that had once been filled with scorn, but were now filled with shame. Without another word, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. When the line clicked open, her voice was stern and unwavering. "Hello, I need to speak to the sheriff. This is Colonel Erica Johnson." At the sheriff's office, Sheriff Richard Moore listened in stunned silence as Erica recounted the events that had just unfolded. Her calm, authoritative tone made it clear that this was no ordinary incident. The sheriff's face paled as he processed what she was telling him. "Colonel Johnson," Sheriff Moore said, his voice tinged with urgency, "I'm sorry to hear about your bad experience. I'll be there right away." Within 15 minutes, the restaurant door opened and Sheriff Moore stepped in, his stern expression surveying the scene. Erica stood firm, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. The young policeman was standing there, head bowed, his hands trembling. The diners, once indifferent, now exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes filled with curiosity and shame. Sheriff Moore stepped up to Erica, bowing his head respectfully. "Colonel Johnson, I am very sorry for what happened. I promise to investigate this matter transparently and fairly." Erica nodded, but her voice remained sharp and firm. "I hope so. This is not only a personal insult, but an abuse of power and discrimination. I cannot ignore this." Turning to the young officer, Sheriff Moore's voice grew stern. "Officer James, do you know who this woman is?" Officer James stammered, his face flushed with embarrassment. I don't know, but I just followed the rules to keep order." Sheriff Moore's disappointment was palpable. He shook his head slowly, his eyes filled with reproach. "Don't make excuses. What law allows you to pull a gun on a citizen who is not acting in a dangerous manner? What law allows you to insult someone simply because they are asking for their legitimate rights?" James remained silent, his head lowered in shame. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Erica took a step forward, her gaze locking onto Officer James with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. "I don't need you to apologize to me personally," she said, her voice cold but resolute. "But I want you to understand that your actions today not only reflect on you, but also damage the trust of the citizens in those entrusted with protecting them." She turned to Sheriff Moore, her eyes never leaving James. "I hope you handle this situation according to the law. This officer is not fit for his position." Sheriff Moore stood there for a moment, processing her words. His gaze shifted between Erica and Officer James. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as the consequences of the officer's actions hung heavy in the air. Finally, Sheriff Moore spoke, his tone grave and authoritative. "You're right, Colonel Johnson. This behavior will not go unaddressed." Erica took a deep breath, her body relaxing just slightly. The silence in the restaurant was broken by the sound of diners quietly returning to their meals, though their glances still lingered, aware of the powerful exchange that had just unfolded. The officer, now visibly shaken, stood motionless, his pride shattered, and Erica, ever the soldier, stood tall, knowing that while this battle had been won, the war against injustice was far from over. Sheriff Moore nodded in agreement with Erica's words, his resolve strengthening as he looked at the young officer. "His actions need to be punished to set an example for others," Erica continued, her voice unwavering. Richard Moore's eyes showed clear determination as he responded, "I am committed to taking concrete action. This cannot be ignored." The next few days saw swift and decisive actions. After taking statements from Erica and witnesses at the scene, the police chief ordered Officer James's immediate suspension. Less than 24 hours later, James was officially fired from the police force. Meanwhile, the waiter, whose discriminatory behavior had escalated the situation, also faced the consequences. The restaurant owner took immediate action, firing the waiter for unprofessional conduct and discrimination. It was a stark reminder that no form of prejudice would be tolerated, especially in places meant to serve and respect every customer equally. A press conference was scheduled, where Police Chief Richard Moore publicly apologized to Colonel Erica Johnson and the community for the disgraceful behavior of one of his officers. Standing beside him, Erica listened as Moore pledged to implement comprehensive human rights and anti-racism training for all officers in the force. His apology was sincere, acknowledging the profound damage done not just to Erica, but to the trust between the community and law enforcement. But Erica wasn't there to claim recognition. She stepped up to the podium, her stance dignified but firm. "I do not stand here to condemn all police officers," Erica began, her voice clear and steady. "I understand that most of them are dedicated, working tirelessly with the purpose of protecting the community. But we cannot tolerate individuals who abuse their power to oppress others. This incident was not just about one officer. It was a reflection of a larger issue that we must confront and challenge." She paused, allowing her words to settle. "I hope this incident serves as a lesson to all of us, one that pushes us toward building a more just, respectful, and equitable society. Thank you for taking the time to listen and for being part of the solution." The room fell silent for a moment before the applause rang out, not for the officers or the press conference, but for the message Erica had delivered. A message that resonated with every individual who had witnessed or heard about the injustice she had faced. As Erica left the press conference, she knew this was just one small victory in a much larger battle. But for that day at least, the scales of justice had tipped in her favor.